Sarah had always dreamed of owning a farmhouse. She imagined cozy evenings by the fireplace, the scent of apple pie baking in the oven, and the gentle sounds of nature lulling her to sleep. When she finally found the perfect place, a charming, albeit slightly dilapidated, farmhouse nestled in the countryside, she felt like her dreams had come true. The house was old, with creaky floors, drafty windows, and a sprawling basement that seemed to stretch on forever. But Sarah saw potential, not problems. She envisioned filling the rooms with laughter and love, restoring the house to its former glory. However, from the moment she moved in, an unsettling feeling lingered, especially in the basement. It was cold and damp, with a musty smell that clung to everything. Shadows danced in the corners, and the silence was often broken by strange, unexplained noises. At first, Sarah tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just an old house settling, making the usual noises that old houses make. But one evening, as she was unpacking boxes in the living room, she heard something that sent a chill down her spine, the faint sound of a child crying. The sound was muffled, as if coming from far away, but there was no mistaking it. It was the unmistakable sound of a child in distress. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She listened intently, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from the basement. With a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, Sarah slowly made her way down the creaking stairs. The crying grew louder as she descended, but it was still faint and distant. She reached the bottom of the stairs and stood for a moment, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The basement stretched out before her, a maze of dusty shelves, forgotten furniture, and shadowy corners. The crying seemed to be coming from somewhere deep within the basement. Holding her breath, Sarah took a tentative step further into the basement. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something indefinable that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the path ahead. Dust motes danced in the beam, creating an eerie, almost ethereal effect. She moved slowly, carefully navigating the maze of obstacles. Old boxes teetered precariously on shelves, threatening to topple over at any moment. Cobwebs clung to her face and hair, making her feel like she was venturing into a forgotten tomb. The crying continued, a faint, heart-wrenching sound that seemed to be leading her deeper and deeper into the darkness. As she moved further into the basement, Sarah began to notice details she hadn't seen before. A rusty old swing set sat abandoned in one corner, its chains swaying gently in the stillness. A stack of newspapers, yellowed with age, lay piled against a wall, their headlines hinting at events from a bygone era. And then there were the pipes. The basement was crisscrossed with a network of old, corroded pipes that snaked their way along the walls and ceiling. They groaned and creaked intermittently, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Sarah paused, listening intently. Could the crying be coming from the pipes? It seemed unlikely, but she couldn't rule it out. Old houses were full of surprises, and the pipes in this house were certainly old enough to make some strange noises. She decided to investigate the pipes more closely. She moved towards the nearest one, shining her flashlight along its length. It was cold and damp to the touch, and covered in a layer of grime. As she ran her hand along the pipe, she noticed a small, almost imperceptible vibration. She leaned closer, straining to hear. And then she heard it again, the faint, unmistakable sound of a child crying, seemingly muffled by the pipe itself. Could the pipes be amplifying a sound from somewhere else? It was a possibility, but where could it be coming from? The house was completely silent except for the crying and the creaking of the old structure. The next morning, the crying was back. Sarah had hoped it was a one-time occurrence, a figment of her imagination fueled by the strangeness of the old house. But as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, she heard it again, the faint, mournful sound of a child weeping. It was definitely coming from the basement. This time, the crying seemed louder, more insistent. It tugged at Sarah's heartstrings, filling her with a sense of unease and a growing feeling of responsibility. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to find out what was going on. After finishing her coffee, Sarah cautiously made her way back down to the basement. The air was even colder and damper than she remembered, and the smell of mildew seemed stronger. The crying was clearer now, a series of soft, heartbreaking sobs. It was definitely a child, and they were definitely in distress. Sarah spent the next hour carefully searching the basement, trying to locate the source of the crying. She checked behind boxes, under furniture, and inside old cabinets. She even crawled into the narrow space beneath the stairs, but found nothing. The crying seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the basement like a ghostly lament. Frustrated and increasingly concerned, Sarah decided to take a break. She went back upstairs and sat down on the couch, trying to gather her thoughts. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe it really was just the pipes, or some other mundane explanation. But the sound of the crying kept replaying in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She thought about calling a plumber to check the pipes, but something held her back. It wasn't just the expense, it was a deeper, more intuitive feeling that the crying wasn't coming from the pipes at all. It was coming from something else, something hidden, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The persistence of the crying was deeply unsettling. This wasn't a random creak or groan, this was a sound of genuine suffering. And Sarah knew, deep down, that she couldn't rest until she found out what it was. The crying just wouldn't stop. Days turned into weeks, and the crying persisted. It wasn't constant, but it was frequent enough to keep Sarah on edge. Sometimes she would hear it in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, and sometimes late at night when she was trying to sleep. The sound seemed to be getting louder, clearer, and more desperate with each passing day. Sarah found herself becoming increasingly preoccupied with the crying. She spent less time unpacking and decorating, and more time listening, searching, and worrying. She started losing sleep, tossing and turning in bed, haunted by the image of a child in distress. The joy she had once felt about owning the farmhouse was slowly being replaced by a growing sense of dread. She decided she needed to talk to someone about it. She couldn't keep it to herself any longer. So, one sunny afternoon, she walked over to her neighbor's house, a small, well-kept cottage just down the road. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was an elderly woman with a kind face and a warm smile. Sarah had only met her a few times since moving in, but she seemed friendly and approachable. After exchanging pleasantries, Sarah hesitantly broached the subject of the crying. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "I've been hearing some strange noises in my basement lately. It sounds like a child crying." Mrs. Henderson's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, dear," she said, "that old house does have its quirks, doesn't it?" She paused for a moment, as if considering her words carefully. "I wouldn't worry too much about it, dear. It's probably just the pipes. They can make some awful noises, especially when the weather changes." Sarah frowned. "But it really sounds like a child crying," she insisted. "I'm worried that something might be wrong." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand reassuringly. Now, dear," she said, "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. That house is old, and old houses make all sorts of strange noises. You'll get used to it." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Henderson wasn't telling her everything. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation, that made Sarah wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. And so, she decided to ask the other neighbors as well. Perhaps someone else had heard something. Over the next few days, Sarah spoke to several other neighbors about the crying. She approached them with a mixture of hope and apprehension, eager for any insight or explanation they might offer. But each conversation followed a similar pattern, leaving Sarah feeling more frustrated and isolated than ever. Mr. Johnson, a gruff, elderly farmer who lived across the road, chuckled when Sarah mentioned the crying. "Old houses are full of noises, young lady," he said, shaking his head. "Probably just the wind whistling through the cracks. Don't let it get to you." Another neighbor, a young couple named the Millers, suggested that it might be the pipes. "Our house is a bit newer, but we still get some strange sounds from the plumbing sometimes," Mrs. Miller said. "It can sound like all sorts of things." Even the town's local historian, a knowledgeable woman named Ms. Gable, dismissed Sarah's concerns. "That house has been standing for over 100 years, she said. "It's seen its share of storms and changes. I'm sure it's just settling. Pay it no mind." Each neighbor offered a similar explanation: it was just the pipes, the wind, the settling of the old house. They all seemed so certain, so dismissive of Sarah's concerns. It was as if they were all reading from the same script, trying to convince her that there was nothing to worry about. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were wrong. The crying sounded too real, too desperate to be dismissed as mere house noises. And the more the neighbors tried to reassure her, the more convinced she became that something was truly amiss. The collective dismissal from the neighbors only fueled her determination. If no one else believed her, then she would have to investigate on her own. She decided to dedicate all her free time to uncovering the source of the crying, no matter how long it took or how unsettling it might be. She armed herself with a flashlight, a notebook, and a growing sense of purpose. She would not be deterred. The child's cry was too real to ignore. Sarah's life began to revolve around the basement. Meals were forgotten, chores were neglected, and sleep became a distant memory. The crying was a constant companion, a haunting melody that echoed in her mind, driving her to the point of obsession. She spent hours in the basement each day, meticulously searching every nook and cranny, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. She started keeping a notebook, documenting every detail of her investigation. She sketched diagrams of the basement, noting the placement of pipes, the location of furniture, and any unusual features she discovered. She recorded the times she heard the crying, the intensity of the sound, and any other relevant information she could gather. Her sleep became increasingly disturbed. She would drift off for a few hours, only to be awakened by the sound of the crying, which seemed even louder and more desperate in the dead of night. She would lie in bed, her heart pounding, listening intently, trying to pinpoint the exact location of the sound. The lack of sleep began to take its toll. Sarah became irritable and withdrawn. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, and her clothes were often rumpled and dirty. She lost interest in everything except the crying and the search for its source. She felt a growing sense of urgency, a feeling that time was running out. She started to see patterns in the crying. It seemed to be more frequent and more intense when it was raining, or when the wind was blowing from a certain direction. She also noticed that the crying seemed to be muffled, as if it were coming from behind a wall or inside a confined space. This observation led her to focus her attention on the walls of the basement. She ran her hands along the cold, damp surfaces, searching for any irregularities, any signs of a hidden room or compartment. She tapped on the walls, listening for any hollow sounds that might indicate an empty space behind them. The crying was not just a sound anymore, it was a beacon, guiding her toward a secret she was determined to uncover. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her, fueling her obsessive quest. The basement was more than just old, it felt ancient, a relic of a forgotten time. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, a constant reminder of the house's age and the secrets it held. Water trickled down the walls in places, leaving dark, glistening streaks that resembled tears. The floor was uneven and cracked, covered in a fine layer of dust that swirled around Sarah's ankles with every step. The layout of the basement was strange and illogical. Narrow passageways led to dead ends, and rooms seemed to branch off in unexpected directions. It was as if the basement had been built piecemeal, with additions and alterations made over the years without any overall plan. This haphazard design made it difficult to navigate and contributed to the feeling of disorientation and unease. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every creak and groan amplified by the silence. As Sarah explored deeper into the basement, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was a subtle sensation, a prickling on the back of her neck, a sense of eyes peering at her from the darkness. She would often stop and turn around, scanning the shadows with her flashlight, but she never saw anything. The feeling of being watched added to the already oppressive atmosphere of the basement. It made Sarah feel vulnerable and exposed, as if she were trespassing in a place where she didn't belong. She tried to dismiss it as her imagination, fueled by lack of sleep and mounting stress, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. The dampness seeped into her clothes, chilling her to the bone. The strange layout disoriented her, making her feel lost and confused. And the feeling of being watched unnerved her, making her question her sanity. Yet, despite all this, Sarah refused to give up. The crying was too real, too desperate to ignore. She had come too far to turn back now. She had to find the source of the crying, no matter what it took. And she had to do it soon, before it was too late. The urgency was consuming her. She pressed on. After weeks of relentless searching, Sarah finally stumbled upon something that caught her attention. Behind a row of old, rickety storage shelves, piled high with forgotten belongings, she noticed a section of wall that looked distinctly different from the rest. It was a brick wall, but unlike the foundation walls of the basement, which were made of rough, uneven stones, this wall was constructed of neatly laid bricks, carefully mortared together. The brick wall was also strangely positioned. It didn't seem to serve any structural purpose, and it blocked off a section of the basement that would otherwise have been open space. It was as if someone had deliberately built the wall to conceal something. Sarah ran her hands along the surface of the brick wall, feeling the smooth, cold texture of the bricks beneath her fingertips. She noticed that the mortar between the bricks was crumbling in places, and that some of the bricks were slightly discolored, as if they had been exposed to moisture for a long time. She tapped on the wall, listening intently. The sound was solid, but there was a slight echo, suggesting that there might be a small space behind it. Sarah's heart began to race. Could this be it? Could this be the source of the crying? She examined the wall more closely, searching for any signs of an opening, any cracks or crevices that might offer a glimpse inside. She noticed a small gap between the wall and the floor, just wide enough to slide her fingers through. She reached down and felt around, but she couldn't feel anything. The crying seemed to be coming from directly behind the brick wall. It was faint, but unmistakable, a series of soft, muffled sobs that tugged at Sarah's heart. She knew, without a doubt, that she had found the source of the crying. Now, all she had to do was figure out how to get inside. The wall stood as a barrier, but also as a promise. The answer, she felt, was just on the other side. She had never felt so close. The solution was within reach. Sarah knew she had to get through the brick wall. Every sob from behind it was a fresh wave of determination. She returned upstairs, rummaging through the garage until she found a hammer and a chisel. They were old and rusty, but they would have to do. Back in the basement, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. She started by carefully chipping away at the mortar around one of the bricks, using the chisel and hammer with slow, deliberate strokes. Dust and small pieces of mortar filled the air, making her cough and her eyes water. It was slow, painstaking work, but she refused to be deterred. With each strike of the hammer, she felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and excitement. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally managed to loosen the first brick. It was heavy and damp, and it came away from the wall with a loud crack, sending a shower of dust and debris cascading to the floor. Sarah coughed, waving away the dust, and peered into the hole she had created. It was dark and she couldn't see anything. The crying seemed louder now, more distinct. She removed another brick, and then another, widening the hole bit by bit. The work was exhausting, but she couldn't stop. She had to get through. As the hole grew larger, she could finally make out a faint glimmer of light coming from the other side. It was weak, but it was enough to give her hope. She redoubled her efforts, hammering and chiseling with renewed vigor. With a final, desperate heave, she managed to remove a large section of the wall, creating an opening big enough to crawl through. She paused for a moment, catching her breath, and peered into the darkness beyond. The crying was louder than ever now, a desperate plea for help. Sarah knew she was about to enter a place where no one had been for a very long time. She steeled herself and crawled through the opening, ready to face whatever awaited her on the other side. Time was of the essence. She couldn't hesitate. The crying spurred her on. The air inside the hidden room was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of dust and something else, something indefinably human and desperate. Sarah shone her flashlight around the small, enclosed space. The beam danced across rough stone walls, a dirt floor, and a low, beamed ceiling. There were no windows, no furniture, nothing to suggest that this room had ever been intended for habitation. It was a prison. In the far corner of the room, huddled against the wall, she saw a small figure. It was a child, a toddler, curled up in a fetal position, their face hidden from view. The child was wearing tattered clothes that were far too big, and their hair was matted and dirty. They were so still, so silent, that for a moment, Sarah feared the worst. "Hello?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" The child didn't respond. Sarah took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She shone her flashlight directly on the child, and what she saw made her gasp. The child was emaciated, their skin stretched taut over their bones. Their eyes were sunken and lifeless, and their lips were cracked and bleeding. They looked like they hadn't eaten or drunk anything in days. It was clear that the child was severely dehydrated and malnourished. As Sarah moved closer, the child slowly raised their head. Their eyes, wide and filled with fear, met Sarah's. A weak whimper escaped their lips. It was the sound Sarah had been hearing all along, the sound that had driven her to this moment. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm here to help you. You're safe now." She reached out a hand, offering comfort, offering hope. The child flinched, but didn't pull away. The glimmer of light that Sarah provided, both literally and figuratively, was enough to break through the darkness. She knew she had to act quickly. The child's life depended on it. The moment of discovery was overwhelming. But action was necessary. Now. Sarah's mind raced. She needed to get the child out of this room, out of this basement, and to a hospital as quickly as possible. But she knew she had to be careful. The child was clearly traumatized and in a fragile state. Any sudden movements or loud noises could frighten them even more. She spoke in a soft, soothing voice, trying to reassure the child that everything was going to be all right. "My name is Sarah," she said. "What's your name?" The child hesitated for a moment, then whispered a name so faint that Sarah could barely hear it. "Lily," the child said. "Lily," Sarah repeated, her voice filled with tenderness. "That's a beautiful name. Lily, can you stand up? I'm going to help you get out of here." Lily shook her head weakly. "Tired," she whispered. Sarah gently reached out and touched Lily's hand. It was cold and clammy. She knew she couldn't force Lily to do anything. She had to gain her trust. "Okay, Lily," Sarah said. "I'm going to pick you up, okay? I'm going to carry you out of here. It's going to be all right." Slowly, carefully, Sarah scooped Lily up into her arms. The child was surprisingly light, almost weightless. As she held Lily close, Sarah felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to keep her safe. She turned and carefully made her way back towards the opening in the wall. The climb back through the hole was awkward and difficult, but she managed it without dropping Lily. Once she was back in the main part of the basement, she paused for a moment, catching her breath. She knew she had to get Lily upstairs and call for help, but she also knew she couldn't leave her alone for a second. She had no idea how long Lily had been in that room, or what she had been through. But she knew that she was safe now. And Sarah would do everything in her power to keep her that way. The urgency was overwhelming. Time was slipping away. Every second counted. She had to get Lily to safety. Now. Clutching Lily tightly, Sarah ascended the creaking basement stairs, each step a monumental effort. The weight of the child, combined with the adrenaline coursing through her veins, made her tremble. She burst through the basement door and into the relative brightness of the kitchen, blinking against the sudden light. Without pausing, she stumbled towards the phone, her fingers fumbling with the buttons as she dialed 911. Her voice was shaky as she spoke to the operator, relaying her location and the dire situation. "I found a child," she gasped, "locked in a hidden room in my basement. She's very sick. Please, send help quickly." While waiting for the ambulance to arrive, Sarah gently placed Lily on the kitchen table, covering her with a warm blanket she had grabbed from the living room. She rummaged through her cupboards, finding a small bottle of water and a package of crackers. She offered them to Lily, who eyed them with suspicion but slowly reached out and took them. Sarah watched Lily eat and drink, her heart aching with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She couldn't imagine what the child had endured, locked away in that dark, cold room. She vowed to do everything she could to help her recover. As Lily ate, Sarah noticed something else. Around Lily's neck, hidden beneath her tattered clothes, was a small, silver locket. Sarah gently lifted the locket and opened it. Inside were two tiny photographs, a picture of a smiling woman and a picture of a happy-looking man. Could these be Lily's parents? A wave of realization washed over Sarah. This was Lily Thompson. The little girl who had been abducted months ago, the little girl whose picture had been plastered on every news channel and missing person poster. The little girl everyone had given up hope of finding. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she cradled Lily in her arms, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Help was on its way. Lily was going to be okay. And Sarah had found her. The relief was immense. She had saved her. The flashing lights of the ambulance and police cars illuminated the farmhouse as they pulled into the driveway. Paramedics rushed inside, their faces grim with concern. They quickly assessed Lily's condition, administering oxygen and checking her vital signs. "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished," one of the paramedics said to Sarah. "We need to get her to the hospital right away." As the paramedics prepared to transport Lily, two police officers approached Sarah. They were both young and serious, their eyes filled with questions. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened here?" one of the officers asked. Sarah recounted the story, her voice still shaky from the ordeal. She explained how she had heard the crying, how she had searched the basement, and how she had finally discovered the hidden room and Lily. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more and more somber with each passing detail. When Sarah finished her story, they exchanged a look of disbelief. "Ma'am, do you realize who this child is?" one of the officers asked. "This is Lily Thompson. She's been missing for months." Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know," she said. "I saw her picture in the locket she was wearing." The officers were stunned. They had been searching for Lily Thompson for months, following every lead, knocking on every door. And now, here she was, found alive and well in the basement of an old farmhouse. It was a miracle. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens blaring, the police officers turned their attention to the farmhouse. They secured the scene, cordoning off the basement and calling for backup. They knew that this was just the beginning of a long and complex investigation. But for now, their priority was Lily Thompson. She was safe. She was alive. And she was finally going home. The relief was palpable. A dark chapter was closing. Hope had been restored. And it was all thanks to Sarah. The crying had been heard. The child had been found. Justice would follow. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of camera shutters clicking and reporters shouting questions. The farmhouse was surrounded by news vans, their satellite dishes pointed towards the sky. The story of Lily Thompson's discovery had spread like wildfire, and the world wanted to know everything. Sarah, still exhausted and overwhelmed, was thrust into the spotlight. Reporters clamored for interviews, photographers snapped her picture from every angle, and news anchors breathlessly recounted her heroic actions. At first, Sarah was hesitant to speak to the media. She was a private person, and she didn't want the attention. But she quickly realized that she had a responsibility to share her story, to raise awareness about missing children, and to give hope to other families who were still searching for their loved ones. She gave several interviews, carefully choosing her words and focusing on Lily's well-being and the importance of never giving up hope. She described the crying she had heard, the search for the hidden room, and the moment she had finally found Lily. The media portrayed Sarah as a hero, a selfless woman who had risked everything to save a child in need. Her story resonated with people around the world, and she received an outpouring of support and admiration. But amidst the media frenzy, Sarah never forgot about Lily. She visited her at the hospital every day, bringing her toys, books, and flowers. She sat by her bedside, reading her stories and singing her songs. She watched as Lily slowly began to recover, her eyes regaining their sparkle, her smile returning to her face. The doctors and nurses were amazed by Lily's progress. They attributed it to the excellent medical care she was receiving, but they also acknowledged the importance of Sarah's presence in her life. Sarah was more than just a rescuer, she was a friend, a confidant, and a source of comfort and love. The media attention was intense, but Sarah remained grounded. Her focus was on Lily. Everything else was secondary. Lily's recovery was paramount. The spotlight meant nothing compared to that. While Sarah navigated the intense media attention, detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the events that led to Lily's abduction and confinement. They revisited the Thompson family, offering them updates and support. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, searching for any clues that might lead them to the perpetrator. Meanwhile, flashbacks began to surface in Lily's memory, fragmented images of a shadowy figure, a dark room, and a constant feeling of fear. She couldn't articulate much, but her therapists gently guided her through the trauma, helping her to unlock pieces of the puzzle. The police investigation focused on the previous owners of the farmhouse, scrutinizing their backgrounds and interviewing them extensively. They also investigated anyone who had had access to the property in recent years, including contractors, landscapers, and delivery drivers. As the investigation unfolded, the media continued to speculate about the identity of the abductor and their motive. Theories abounded, ranging from a random act of violence to a carefully planned scheme. The pressure on the police to solve the case was immense. Amidst all the chaos, Sarah received a visit from Lily's parents, David and Emily Thompson. They were overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion, thanking Sarah for saving their daughter's life. They told her how they had never given up hope of finding Lily, but that as time went on, their hopes had dwindled. "You gave us our daughter back," Emily Thompson said, her voice choked with tears. "We will never be able to repay you." David Thompson added, "We want you to be a part of Lily's life, Sarah. We want her to know who saved her." Sarah was deeply moved by their words. She knew that she had formed a special bond with Lily, and she was honored to be invited into her life. She promised the Thompsons that she would always be there for Lily, no matter what. The circle was beginning to close. The missing piece was about to be found. The past was about to be revealed. The truth was coming. Months earlier, Lily Thompson had been playing in her backyard when she vanished without a trace. Her parents, David and Emily, had stepped inside for just a moment, and when they returned, Lily was gone. Panic set in immediately. They searched the yard, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. They called the police, who launched a massive search effort. The entire community rallied around the Thompson family. Volunteers scoured the neighborhood, handing out flyers and posting pictures of Lily. The media covered the story extensively, broadcasting Lily's picture on every news channel. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but Lily remained missing. The police followed every lead, but none of them panned out. The Thompson family grew increasingly desperate, their hopes slowly fading with each passing day. They hired private investigators, consulted psychics, and even offered a large reward for information leading to Lily's safe return. But nothing worked. It was as if Lily had simply disappeared into thin air. David and Emily Thompson were devastated. They couldn't sleep, they couldn't eat, they could barely function. Their lives had been shattered by Lily's abduction. They spent their days clinging to the hope that she would be found alive, but deep down, they feared the worst. They visited every park, every playground, every store in their neighborhood, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lily. They attended every community event, praying that she would somehow be there. But their search was always fruitless. As time went on, the media coverage dwindled, and the police investigation slowed down. The world seemed to forget about Lily Thompson. But her parents never did. They continued to search for her, clinging to the faintest glimmer of hope. Until Sarah heard the crying in her basement. The nightmare had been real. The desperation had been palpable. The search had been relentless. But the end was finally in sight. In the hospital, Lily received round-the-clock care from a team of dedicated doctors and nurses. She was slowly rehydrated and nourished, her body gradually regaining its strength. The trauma she had endured had left deep scars, both physical and emotional, but with each passing day, she showed signs of healing. Sarah visited Lily every day, bringing her favorite toys and books. She would sit by her bedside, reading her stories and singing her songs. She would talk to her about the outside world, describing the beauty of the flowers, the warmth of the sun, and the joy of playing with friends. At first, Lily was withdrawn and unresponsive, her eyes filled with fear and suspicion. But as the days went by, she began to open up to Sarah, her trust slowly growing. She would smile at Sarah, reach out to touch her hand, and even whisper a few words. Sarah learned about Lily's favorite things, her love of animals, her fascination with stars, and her dream of becoming a ballerina. She listened patiently as Lily recounted fragmented memories of her abduction, offering her comfort and reassurance. A strong bond formed between Sarah and Lily, a connection that transcended their age difference and their circumstances. Sarah became a surrogate mother figure to Lily, providing her with the love, support, and stability she desperately needed. Lily, in turn, brought a renewed sense of purpose and joy to Sarah's life. The doctors were amazed by Lily's progress. They attributed it to the excellent medical care she was receiving, but they also acknowledged the importance of Sarah's presence in her life. Sarah was a catalyst for Lily's healing, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The bond was undeniable. It was built on trust, compassion, and a shared experience that had changed both of their lives forever. Lily was recovering, and Sarah was helping her every step of the way. The future was looking brighter. The healing had begun. And the crying was finally over. The police investigation into Lily's abduction and confinement intensified, focusing on the farmhouse and its history. Detectives meticulously examined the hidden room, searching for any clues that might identify the abductor. They collected forensic evidence, analyzed fingerprints, and even brought in cadaver dogs to search for any signs of human remains. Suspicion initially fell on the previous owners of the farmhouse, a reclusive couple who had lived there for many years. They had a reputation for being strange and secretive, and some of the neighbors had reported hearing strange noises coming from the house late at night. The police interviewed the couple extensively, but they denied any involvement in Lily's abduction. They claimed that they had never even known about the hidden room in the basement. As the investigation continued, suspicion shifted to other individuals who had had access to the property in recent years. This included contractors who had done work on the house, landscapers who had maintained the grounds, and delivery drivers who had made regular deliveries to the farmhouse. The police interviewed all of these individuals, carefully scrutinizing their backgrounds and looking for any inconsistencies in their stories. They also conducted background checks and searched their homes and vehicles. One name kept surfacing in the investigation, a former handyman named Carl Peterson. He had worked on the farmhouse for several years, doing odd jobs and repairs for the previous owners. He had a key to the house and was familiar with the layout of the basement. Carl Peterson had a criminal record, including a conviction for assault. He had also been known to have a fascination with children. The police brought him in for questioning, and after several hours of interrogation, he finally confessed to abducting Lily Thompson and hiding her in the hidden room in the basement. The pieces were falling into place. The puzzle was being solved. The truth was about to be revealed. Justice was coming for Lily. And for Carl Peterson. His reign of terror was over. Sarah's life had been irrevocably changed. She was no longer just Sarah, the woman who had dreamed of a peaceful life in the country. She was Sarah, the hero, the rescuer, the woman who had found Lily Thompson. The attention was overwhelming. People recognized her everywhere she went. They stopped her on the street to thank her, to shake her hand, to take her picture. She received countless letters and emails from people all over the world, praising her bravery and her compassion. The sudden fame was difficult to adjust to. Sarah was a private person, and she found it challenging to be constantly in the spotlight. She missed her old life, the quiet solitude of the farmhouse, the simple pleasures of everyday living. But she also recognized that her newfound fame had given her a platform, a voice that could be used to make a difference. She decided to use her platform to advocate for missing children and to support organizations that were working to prevent child abduction. She gave speeches at schools, community centers, and fundraising events, sharing her story and urging people to be vigilant and to never give up hope. She worked with law enforcement agencies to raise awareness about child abduction and to improve response times in missing children cases. She also became a spokesperson for several nonprofit organizations that provided support to families of missing children. She helped to raise money for these organizations, and she volunteered her time to help families cope with the trauma of having a missing child. Sarah's efforts made a real difference. She inspired countless people to get involved in the fight against child abduction, and she helped to bring hope to families who had lost loved ones. She had turned her personal tragedy into a force for good, using her fame to make the world a better place. The quiet life she had once craved was gone. But in its place was something even more meaningful, a life of purpose, a life of service, a life dedicated to helping others. She had found her calling. And she was determined to answer it. She was making a difference. One child at a time. Carl Peterson's confession sent shockwaves through the community. People were horrified that someone they knew, someone they had trusted, could be capable of such a heinous crime. The police investigation revealed that Peterson had worked on the farmhouse for several years, doing odd jobs and repairs for the previous owners. He had become familiar with the layout of the house, including the hidden room in the basement. Peterson had a history of mental illness and had been known to have a fascination with children. He had been watching Lily Thompson for months, planning her abduction. He had chosen her because she was small, vulnerable, and lived close to the farmhouse. On the day of the abduction, Peterson had been working on a nearby property. He had seen Lily playing in her backyard and had seized the opportunity to snatch her. He had lured her away from her yard with a promise of candy, then driven her to the farmhouse and locked her in the hidden room in the basement. Peterson had kept Lily confined in the room for months, providing her with minimal food and water. He had visited her sporadically, sometimes going days without checking on her. He had enjoyed the power he had over her, the control he exerted over her life. His motive was a twisted desire for control and companionship. He had been lonely and isolated, and he had seen Lily as a way to fill the void in his life. He had convinced himself that he was doing her a favor, that he was saving her from a life of unhappiness. The police arrested Peterson and charged him with kidnapping, aggravated assault, and child endangerment. He was held without bail, awaiting trial. Justice was about to be served. The truth was out. And Lily could finally begin to heal. The nightmare was finally over. The monster had been caught. He would pay for his crimes. The day Lily was finally released from the hospital was a day of immense joy and celebration. Sarah, along with David and Emily Thompson, were there to greet her as she walked out of the hospital doors. The reunion was incredibly emotional. David and Emily rushed towards Lily, scooping her up in a tight embrace. Tears streamed down their faces as they held her close, whispering words of love and gratitude. Lily clung to her parents, burying her face in their shoulders. She had been through so much, but now she was finally home, surrounded by the love and warmth of her family. Sarah watched the reunion from a distance, her heart swelling with emotion. She had played a part in bringing this family back together, and she felt an immense sense of pride and satisfaction. After a few moments, David and Emily turned to Sarah, their eyes filled with gratitude. They walked over to her, Lily still nestled in their arms, and embraced her tightly. "Thank you, Sarah," Emily said, her voice choked with tears. "You gave us our daughter back. We will never forget what you did for us." "We want you to be a part of our family, Sarah," David added. "We want Lily to know who saved her life." Sarah smiled, tears streaming down her own face. "I would be honored," she said. From that day forward, Sarah became an integral part of the Thompson family. She visited them often, spending time with Lily, playing games, reading stories, and simply being there for her. Lily thrived in the loving and supportive environment of her family. She slowly began to heal from the trauma she had endured, her spirit gradually regaining its light. She never forgot what had happened to her, but she refused to let it define her life. She was a survivor, and she was determined to live her life to the fullest. And Sarah would be there, every step of the way, to support her, to encourage her, and to love her. The family was complete. The healing was underway. The future was bright. And the nightmare was finally over. They were together, at last. Sarah's bravery and quick thinking did not go unnoticed. She received national recognition for her heroic actions, becoming a symbol of hope and compassion for people all across the country. She was invited to the White House, where she met with the President and First Lady. They praised her courage and presented her with a Medal of Honor, recognizing her extraordinary service to the nation. She was also honored by numerous organizations and community groups, receiving awards and accolades for her dedication to helping others. Her story was featured in magazines, newspapers, and television shows, inspiring countless people to get involved in their communities and to make a difference in the world. Sarah used her newfound platform to continue advocating for missing children and to raise awareness about the importance of child safety. She testified before Congress, urging lawmakers to pass legislation to protect children from abduction and exploitation. She also established a foundation to support families of missing children, providing them with financial assistance, counseling services, and legal aid. The foundation quickly became a leading resource for families in need, helping them to navigate the complex and often overwhelming process of searching for a missing child. Sarah's work had a profound impact on the lives of countless children and families. She had turned her personal tragedy into a force for good, using her fame and her platform to make the world a better place. She was a true hero, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and hopeless. Her legacy would live on for generations to come, inspiring others to follow in her footsteps and to make a difference in their own communities. The nation saluted her. Her actions had saved a life. She was a true inspiration. The world was a better place because of her. She had become a symbol of hope. And her work was far from over. Years passed. Lily grew into a bright and happy young girl, thriving in the love and support of her family. She never forgot what had happened to her, but she refused to let it define her life. She was a survivor, and she was determined to live her life to the fullest. Sarah continued to be a part of Lily's life, a constant source of love and support. She watched with pride as Lily blossomed into a confident and compassionate young woman, using her own experiences to help others. The farmhouse, once a source of unease and mystery, had become a place of peace and healing. Sarah had renovated the basement, transforming the dark and damp space into a bright and welcoming playroom for Lily and her friends. One evening, as the sun began to set, Sarah sat on the porch of the farmhouse, watching Lily play in the yard. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the sound of crickets chirping in the distance. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath of the fresh country air. She no longer felt the unease that had once plagued her. The crying was gone, replaced by the laughter of a child, the joy of a family, and the satisfaction of knowing that she had made a difference. She opened her eyes and smiled, watching as Lily ran towards her, her face radiant with happiness. Lily wrapped her arms around Sarah, squeezing her tightly. "I love you, Sarah," Lily said. "I love you too, Lily," Sarah replied, her heart overflowing with love. As they stood there, embraced in the warm evening light, Sarah knew that she had finally found the peace and happiness she had been searching for. She had come to the farmhouse seeking a peaceful life, but she had found something much more meaningful, a purpose, a family, and a legacy of love and compassion. The crying had led her to this moment. The darkness had given way to light. The nightmare was finally over. And Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made a difference. One child, one family, one world at a time. The farmhouse was finally home. And Sarah was finally at peace.